Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're embarking on a truly fascinating journey right into the heart of the Mediterranean. We're exploring a relationship that has, well, for over a century, really profoundly shaped history, economics, and even the very notion of national interest for one of Europe's key players. We're talking about Italy and Libya, two nations intimately linked, not just by geography, obviously, but by a really complex, often turbulent tapestry of pragmatic foreign policy and a shared history that, continues to echo in today's headlines.
It really does.
Yeah.
And what we've gathered for this deep dive, it gives us this macro historical perspective. It reveals how Italy's policy towards Libya has been consistently anchored by, well, two core unyielding pillars. First, a relentless, almost obsessive pursuit of power and control. And second, an equally critical, unwavering need to ensure stability. And this isn't just stability within Libya itself, but crucially, stability in their bilateral relations, making sure Italy's own interests are always protected. This deep dive isn't just about recounting events, it's about dissecting why Italy made the choices it did, some of them pretty controversial.
Right. So, what's our mission today? We're going to meticulously unpack this long-standing, often really fraught relationship. We'll trace its evolution from Italy's deeply challenging colonial past, right through to the volatile, fragmented landscape of the post-Gaddafi era. You're going to discover the surprising, sometimes ethically challenging drivers behind Italy's actions, the unexpected obstacles and geopolitical chess games it found itself tangled up in, and precisely why this particular relationship remains so vital to Italy's strategic future even now.
Exactly. We'll be meticulously examining how Italy, at basically every turn, sought to maximize its economic and political interests in Libya, while at the same time navigating the significant, often existential risks posed by Libya's inherent instability. Because that instability, as we've seen so many times, could easily just spill over Italy's borders, directly harming its national security, its economic well-being, issues like security and managing irregular migration. As our deep dive will clearly illustrate, these have always been pressing, fundamental concerns for Italy, deeply influencing pretty much every foreign policy choice made when it comes to Libya.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Buckle up, because we're about to dive deep into the anatomy of a truly pragmatic policy, maybe revealing layers you hadn't considered before. So, to really grasp the enduring interest Italy has in Libya, we absolutely first need to understand the foundational reasons why Libya is so crucial, not just geographically, but also economically. It's a story rooted in Italy's fundamental needs and, well, Libya's strategic position.
Indeed. Libya occupies this, well, undeniable strategic position, smack bang in the middle of the North African Mediterranean coast. And it's not just near Italy, it's directly across the sea. Think of it as a literal historical crossroads, bridging three continents, Europe, Africa, and the Middle East by both land and sea. This geographical proximity, it inherently places both countries within each other's immediate spheres of influence, meaning any significant development or, instability in one nation inevitably becomes immediately, often critically, relevant to the other. You just can't ignore your closest neighbor across, well, the busiest sea lane in the world.
And it's far more than just location, isn't it? We're talking about a nation incredibly rich in resources, a real magnet for any developing industrial power back then.
Precisely. Beyond its critical geopolitics, Libya is, well, blessed with immense traditional energy resources. We're talking vast, easily accessible reserves of oil and natural gas. This gives it undeniable geoeconomic significance, especially for a country like Italy. Italy, as you know, secured its political unity quite late compared to other major European powers, only in 1861, and at that pivotal moment, its industrial revolution was kicking off. But Italy was severely lacking the domestic raw materials, the energy sources it needed for its factories. So this powerful combination, Libya's closeness and its huge resource wealth, immediately, almost instinctively, turned Italy's strategic focus towards its southern neighbor, seeing it not just as convenient, but as a vital gateway to Africa and an essential, almost non-negotiable source of critical stuff.
So this control, or at least, profound influence over Libya became a priority right from the very beginning of Italy's unified foreign policy, almost baked into its national strategy.
That's absolutely right. The historical narrative from that period, it's really clear. From the moment of Italy's unification, controlling what they famously and rather possessively called their fourth shore, that was a primary, almost obsessive foreign policy concern. And this wasn't a fleeting interest or some momentary ambition. Libya's critical importance endured through some of the most tumultuous periods in modern history. It remained vital through big conflicts like the Italo-Turkish War in 1911, both world wars, the complex dynamics of the Cold War. and even into the post-Cold War landscape, leading right into the very volatile post-Gaddafi periods of today. Its importance has been remarkably consistent, even across wildly different international situations and despite huge changes in Italy itself.
So, as Italy evolved and the global landscape shifted, what were the main enduring interests, the ones that just kept persisting over this incredibly long and complex history? Because it feels like the specific challenges might change, but the underlying goals remain surprisingly constant.
That's the key insight here, really. The core interests have consistently revolved around several interconnected and vital areas: securing its economy, fostering trade routes, getting hold of essential raw materials, ensuring a reliable energy supply, particularly oil and gas, safeguarding national security, managing and controlling those irregular migration flows that often came through Libya, and of course, counterterrorism efforts. These factors, alongside Libya's undeniable geographical position, its immense resource wealth, and critically the shifting interests and interventions of other global and regional actors, they have fundamentally shaped and continually reshaped Italy's pragmatic policy towards its North African neighbor. It's a constant calculation of risk and reward.
So, this isn't just dusty history then. It's a living policy, constantly adapting, recalibrating, but always keeping Libya firmly at its core. And to truly understand the roots of this unique, often intense bond, we have to go back. Back to when Italy's pursuit of power took on that distinctly colonial and deeply controversial form. Our deep dive into Italy's power seeking really kicks off with the colonial period, specifically from its invasion in 1911 up to 1943. And this wasn't just about grabbing resources, like many colonial ventures were. For Italy, it was profoundly tangled up with its fledgling national identity and this almost desperate quest to achieve a stronger, more respected international standing among the established European powers.
Indeed. After its relatively late political unification, Italy still kind of felt like an outsider, maybe a junior partner among the European giants. Many influential Italian politicians and thinkers truly believed that embarking on this path of colonialism, of outward expansionism, particularly into Libya, could be a powerful, almost magical tool. They saw it as a way to resolve persistent internal divisions, serious socioeconomic problems within Italy itself, things like widespread poverty, unemployment, and quite grandiosely, they hoped it would even restore Italy to some semblance of its former Roman Empire glory. So acquiring Libya was seen as a direct path to sparking economic dynamism, providing access to much-needed raw materials Italy lacked, opening up new living and working spaces for its rapidly growing, often poor population, and crucially, boosting its international prestige. This drive for glory was particularly sharp after that humiliating failure trying to annex Ethiopia in 1896. That really bruised the national ego. This was about proving Italy's place among the great powers, whatever it took.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting and, frankly, quite disturbing. As we dig into this period, the word occupation almost feels too gentle for what Italy actually did. How did they truly assert their power, their quest for control during those years? What was the reality like on the ground for Libyans?
Yeah, gentle is definitely not the word. Initially, Italy encountered significant, deeply rooted resistance from Libya's existing Islamic political and social order, particularly from groups like the Senussi movement. This wasn't a simple, quick takeover. It was a protracted, brutal struggle from the start. But under Benito Mussolini, who seized power in 1922 and brought in the fascist era, the colonial policy in Libya changed dramatically. It became exceptionally harsh, systematic, utterly brutal. This included devastating military operations targeting not just armed resistance, but whole communities, leading to widespread civilian deaths. There was massive land confiscation, often from fertile coastal areas, which was then given to Italian settlers. There was deliberate, aggressive suppression of Islamic heritage, trying to erase local culture. And perhaps most disturbingly, widespread discrimination based on race became institutionalized, often leading to forced labor for Libyans on Italian projects. The main goal was to completely break the existing Libyan social and political order and ruthlessly impose an Italian fascist one.
So, Mussolini's regime wasn't just about military control then. It was about a complete, systematic reshaping of Libyan society, its very identity, from the ground up.
Precisely. Mussolini's government, in its single-minded pursuit of absolute control, just ignored parliament, ignored existing laws.
Yeah.
It radically redefined colonial citizenship with the 1927 law. It created this stark, legally codified difference between Italian citizens with full rights and Libyans, who were considered just subjects of the Italian state, stripped of most political rights, subjected to a much worse legal status. But the really chilling insight here is how deeply Italy tied its quest for power with the literal erasure of indigenous identity. A key and deeply disturbing strategy was what they called demographic colonialism. a plan pioneered by Governor Italo Balbo. This was basically a deliberate policy to fundamentally alter Libya's political, legal, and ethnic structure by settling huge numbers of unemployed Italian peasants and agricultural workers on this confiscated land. They aimed to colonize not just territory, but the very fabric of Libyan society itself.
That's a truly powerful and disturbing strategy. What was the underlying long-term goal of this massive demographic shift? Was it just about moving people or something far more profound, more permanent?
Oh, it was far more profound and deeply insidious. This demographic shift was meticulously planned, heavily financed by both the Italian state and significant private money. Settler families arriving in Libya weren't just left to figure things out. They were given everything they needed: farm equipment, seeds, livestock, housing, credit, even technical guidance. Crucially, this wasn't based on natural economic opportunities or market forces. No. Instead, it was about creating artificial conditions to permanently entrench the fascist colonial model and actively support Italy's ambitious hegemonic claims over the Mediterranean. Balbo even went further in this quest for control and integration. He unified the previously separate regions of Tripolitania and the Cyrenaica under a single administrative entity, officially calling it the Libyan colony. The strategic goal here was twofold. First, to completely weaken any lingering ties Libya might have had with its Ottoman past, and second, simultaneously to emphasize an ancient Greco-Roman history for the territory, thereby reinforcing Italy's territorial claims as a legitimate successor to that classical imperial legacy. It was all about justification.
But Mussolini also made some investments in infrastructure, maybe some services for the local Libyan population, right? Was that actual pragmatism at play, or was there any genuine attempt at development for the Libyans themselves?
It was overwhelmingly pragmatism, a very calculated, almost theatrical move, you could say. While Mussolini certainly believed in a strict hierarchy of nations, with Italy firmly at the top, he also understood the crucial need for international perception and, ideally, international acceptance of Italy's colonial project. So investments in Libyan infrastructure like building roads, developing some public works, maybe even setting up limited health services, were primarily a pragmatic move to improve Italy's image on the world stage. The goal was to secure international acceptance for its expansionism, and by appearing to be a benevolent, or at least a modernizing colonial power, protect its long-term interests in North Africa and the Mediterranean from criticism or intervention or challenges by other big powers. It was essentially PR with a very strategic underlying purpose.
Okay, so as World War II progressed and the tide started to turn against the Axis powers, what happened to these incredibly ambitious plans for Libya? Did Italy manage to hang on to any of its influence?
No, the grand plans really began to unravel. During World War II, the Western powers, including Italy, had extensive, though often competing plans to divide Libya into three distinct regions: Tripolitania, which they saw as Europe-oriented; Cyrenaica, leaning more towards the Middle East, maybe under British influence; and Fezzan, which would be linked to French Africa. Italy, even within this fluid and rapidly changing situation, specifically planned for an autonomous Tripolitania. Now, this wasn't about completely giving up control, but rather about protecting the rights of its many Italian residents still living there and fostering continued economic cooperation. This actually reveals a pragmatic awareness on Italy's part that Libya's independence was probably coming soon, and they desperately wanted to retain a significant degree of influence, even if direct colonial rule was clearly ending. They wanted the seat at the future table.
But that didn't really go according to plan, did it? Italy didn't get to shape Libya's future the way it wanted, or keep that fourth shore.
No, it certainly did not. Italy's expansionist ambitions under Mussolini, particularly its military presence and aggressive actions in North Africa, posed a serious direct threat to British power in the Mediterranean. After a period of intense, ultimately unsuccessful diplomatic talks between Italy and Britain, Italian forces suffered significant, devastating setbacks. They lost Benghazi in 1942, then Tripoli in 1943 to decisive Allied counterattacks, mostly from British and Commonwealth forces. This marked an irreversible turning point. From 1942 to 1951, Britain and France effectively controlled Libya. France managed the southern Fezzan region. Britain oversaw Cyrenaica and Tripolitania. The ultimate formal blow came with the 1947 Paris Peace Treaty. Italy was legally forced to relinquish all claims to Libya and its other remaining colonies. This treaty marked the official, definitive end of Italy's direct colonial power in Libya. The fourth shore was officially lost.
So, Italy loses its colonies, direct colonial power is over, but the story doesn't end there. How did Italy, with its historical obsession, manage to maintain its search for power once Libya gained full independence in 1951? It seems like they just shifted tactics rather than abandoning their core objectives.
Absolutely, it was a profound and immediate tactical shift.
Mm.
A masterclass in adapting to new geopolitical realities, really. The post-World War II era brought these significant idealistic changes globally, with a strong focus on decolonization, plus intense international pressure and the active role of the UN. These forces together led to Libya's independence under King Idris VI. Immediately after this pivotal moment, significant economic development started drawing renewed, intense Western interest, particularly the systematic oil exploration from 1954, culminating in the discovery of truly major reserves in 1959. This discovery was an undeniable game changer. It intensified competition among all major Western powers, including Italy, for influence and, crucially, access to these new resources.
So Libya's newfound oil wealth really was a game changer, transforming the stakes completely. How did Italy adapt its approach, moving from direct colonial control to something much more subtle, but still clearly aimed at maintaining power and influence?
Well, with Libya adopting a largely pro-Western stance under King Idris I, Italy immediately sought to build close, robust ties. They leveraged their historical connections, their geographical proximity. Having been forced to withdraw as the colonial power, Italy's new aim was to transition from direct rule to remaining the dominant political and economic force in Libya, and to secure guaranteed future economic gains from its newly independent neighbor. A crucial, overarching priority was protecting the rights of its many citizens still residing in Libya, a significant expat community, and safeguarding the substantial pre-existing interests of Italian companies that had already invested heavily there. It was about preserving what they still had and strategically building for the future, making sure Italy started at the forefront of Libya's development.
What were the concrete benefits, the nature of this evolving relationship during King Idris's reign? It sounds like a period that was mostly mutually beneficial, a kind of win-win situation.
Relations during this time were generally quite positive and indeed mutually beneficial. They established a foundation of trust and economic interdependence. Libya sold its crude oil to Italy, providing a vital, close, and increasingly essential energy source for Italy's booming post-war economy. In return, major Italian companies like Eni, Italy's national hydrocarbon agency, a real giant in the energy sector, and FIA, the iconic car company, made significant inroads into the Libyan market. They made large-scale investments not just in Libya's growing oil and gas sector, but also across North Africa in infrastructure and other industries. Libya quickly became economically indispensable to Italy, underpinning a critical part of Italy's industrial and economic growth. This cemented a powerful incentive for continued engagement.
Then comes Muammar Gaddafi in 1969, rises to power through a military coup deeply driven by Arab nationalism, anti-Western sentiment. How did his unpredictable rise fundamentally impact this evolving relationship? It must have introduced a huge element of uncertainty and risk.
Oh, absolutely. Gaddafi's military coup, deeply imbued with this radical Arab nationalism, brought immediate, profound, and often confrontational changes. It led to the swift closure of key U.S. and British military bases in Libya, and, crucially, the nationalization of many foreign oil fields. This was an existential test for Italy's interests, particularly given that Eni had been an absolutely key player in Libya's oil sector since its discovery. Eni was central to shaping Italy's entire foreign policy. Gaddafi's notoriously unpredictable nature, his anti-Western rhetoric, it posed significant immediate risks to Italy's vital oil supply and its substantial investments. It created intense uncertainty, forced Italy to rethink its strategy.
But E&I wasn't fully nationalized like other American and British companies were. That seems like a remarkable exception, almost a sign of some kind of special bond.
That's an absolutely crucial point, and it really speaks volumes about Italy's unique brand of pragmatism. While many American, British, and Israeli oil companies were indeed fully nationalized in the 1970s, just outright expropriated, Eni's subsidiary, AGOP, was largely allowed to continue its operations, although under a partial nationalization model where the Libyan state took a majority stake. This unusual exception was largely due to Italy's deliberate, soft approach to the Gaddafi regime. Driven by its profound energy sensitivity, Italy simply had much more to lose from a complete break with Libya than other European countries did. This cautious, almost appeasing approach fostered a unique, though sometimes precarious, special relationship, despite the volatility and Gaddafi's often hostile actions towards other Western powers.
And we keep hearing about Aldo Moro's significant role here, promoting this balanced and cautious policy, even amidst these escalating tensions and Gaddafi's anti-Western stance. What was the essence of that policy? What did it look like?
Yes. Aldo Moro, serving as Italy's foreign minister from 1969 to 1974, was truly the architect of this enduring foundational policy. He wasn't just reacting. He advocated for a deeply nuanced, balanced approach in Italy's foreign relations, carefully navigating the complex currents between Arab countries, continental Europe, and the Anglo-American powers. This strategic vision, prioritizing engagement over confrontation, led directly to the signing of the pivotal 1974 Economic, Scientific, and Technical Cooperation Agreement between Italy and Libya. This agreement wasn't just symbolic, it solidified relations, significantly strengthened economic and energy cooperation. It established a comprehensive framework that consistently prioritized pragmatic engagement over ideological confrontation. That became a cornerstone of Italian diplomacy with Libya for decades.
It's truly remarkable that even after Gaddafi expelled 20,000 Italians, a massive number, and nationalized foreign assets, Moro still pushed for engagement, for cooperation, even when many inside Italy must have been calling for a complete break. Why such persistence, such a willingness to overlook major provocations?
Moro's decision, despite widespread calls for a tougher stance from hardliners within Italy, was deeply calculated. It showed Italy's almost unparalleled capacity for realpolitik. He recognized Libya's immense, undeniable economic opportunities across various sectors, way beyond just oil. His unexpected overture to Gaddafi, right after the expulsions, led to this pragmatic, mutually beneficial solution. An impressive 20,000 Italian technicians and skilled workers actually replaced those who had been expelled, ensuring continued Italian presence, expertise, influence. Most critically, ENI and its affiliates were not only allowed to remain, but actually thrived, which proved to be a huge strategic advantage for Italy, especially during the turbulent 1973 oil crisis when many other nations were struggling with severe energy shortages. Italy, by playing its cards differently, came out stronger.
Beyond energy, Italy also found a lucrative market for arms, right?
Oh.
It seems like this relationship spanned many critical sectors for the Italian economy, showing just how deeply intertwined the two nations became.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. Except for limited periods when international sanctions were imposed due to Libya's alleged ties to terrorism. Arms sales from Italy to Libya continuously increased from the 1970s all through the Gaddafi era. This provided a significant, often quiet boost to the Italian economy, showing the breadth and depth of their economic interdependence. This enduring, pragmatic relationship even saw Eni's crucial oil extraction activities in Libya extended way out to 2042, and natural gas to 2047, formalized by a 2007 agreement. Moro's balanced approach really did set a powerful, long-lasting precedent for a cautious, careful Libya policy that endured for decades, consistently prioritizing stability and access over moral condemnation or fully aligning with other Western powers.
This is fascinating. Even through periods of extreme international tension where Gaddafi was actively challenging the West, Italy remarkably maintained this pragmatic stance. What were some of those particularly turbulent moments that tested this unique approach to its absolute limit?
The 1980s in particular were exceptionally strained, incredibly volatile for Italy-Libya relations, often put Italy in a very difficult diplomatic spot. Issues included heated oil exploration disputes with Malta, where Italy actually sided with Malta against Libyan claims, the tragic Ustica passenger plane incident in 1980, a mystery that still haunts Italy, directly tied by many to alleged Libyan actions. The devastating 1980 Bologna train station bombing, which Italian investigators later linked to international terrorist groups with suspected Libyan state sponsorship. The 1984 London police killing of Yvonne Fletcher outside the Libyan embassy, and the horrific 1986 Berlin nightclub bombing, all of which were directly attributed to Libya by the United States and its allies. This escalating pattern of alleged Libyan-sponsored terrorism eventually led to the U.S. bombing of Tripoli and Benghazi in April 1986. A mere day later, Libya retaliated directly, launching a missile attack on the NATO base on Italy's Lampedusa island, a direct strike on Italian soil, which naturally led to mutual diplomatic expulsions and a significant military escalation across the Mediterranean.
Wow, that's incredibly intense. And then the Lockerbie bombing in 1988 also implicated Libya, which must have further complicated Italy's already precarious position on the world stage, especially given its close ties to Gaddafi.
It absolutely did. The Lockerbie bombing, bringing down Pan Am Flight 103 over Scotland, led to comprehensive, crippling sanctions being imposed on Libya by the U.S. and its allies. Despite intense international pressure, Italy remained remarkably reluctant to fully impose those sanctions. They viewed Libya as an absolutely vital trade partner with significant hydrocarbon reserves that Italy heavily relied upon. They worked strenuously to minimize any negative impacts on their bilateral relations, and crucially, to avoid getting caught in the middle of the escalating fight between the U.S. and Libya. Their pragmatic approach, focused on preserving economic and energy ties, was unwavering, even at the cost of potentially alienating key allies.
So Italy tried to play a bridge role then, attempting to mediate rather than taking a firm side, even when its closest allies were heavily involved in sanctions and direct confrontation. That's a bold diplomatic choice.
Precisely. Italy actively sought to act as a bridge and a reference country, trying to facilitate dialogue, help Libya improve its deeply fractured relations with the West, and reintegrate into the international community, particularly concerning counterterrorism cooperation. This deep-seated pragmatism eventually led to a significant agreement in 1999, largely facilitated by Italy's quiet diplomacy behind the scenes. Gaddafi, committed to cooperating on counterterrorism, explicitly pledged no direct or indirect support for terrorism. Italy then played a leading, almost lobbying role in convincing the international community that Libya was now trustworthy, which, combined with Gaddafi's strategic concessions on nuclear programs and human rights, ultimately led to the lifting of UN sanctions in 2003. It was a clear demonstration of Italy leveraging its unique relationship, its diplomatic capital, for broader international outcomes, all while consistently prioritizing its own strategic interests.
Okay, now, let's pivot to that second crucial pillar of Italy's pragmatic policy towards Libya, the constant, often desperate search for stability. How did Italy attempt to establish this stability during its colonial occupation, which, as we discussed earlier, was anything but stable for the Libyans themselves?
Yeah, that's a critical paradox, isn't it? Italy's concept of stability during the colonial period was entirely self-serving and, well, brutally imposed. Initially, from about 1917 to 1923, some Italian governments did try to stabilize their shaky position in Libya through negotiations with various Libyan groups amidst the strong resistance they faced. There was a brief period of trying accommodation. However, with Mussolini's rise to power and the consolidation of fascist rule, that approach shifted dramatically and ruthlessly. Italy pursued brutal, uncompromising policies, violently suppressing revolts, aiming to reestablish order purely by overwhelming military force, not through any kind of dialogue, cooperation, or genuine development for the locals.
So their idea of stability was entirely imposed, not negotiated or mutually beneficial. It was stability purely on their terms, through subjugation and brute force.
Exactly. And the methods were horrifying. From June 1930, Italy established a network of concentration camps in Cyrenaica, which was the heartland of the Libyan resistance led by Omar al-Mukhtar. Conditions in these camps were horrific. Widespread torture, starvation, many deaths due to brutal treatment, lack of basic necessities. Beyond the camps, entire populations were forcibly migrated from fertile coastal areas into the harsh interior, resulting in widespread starvation, disease, and the devastating collapse of Libya's traditional agriculture and vital trade networks. Italy's overarching attempt was to impose an Italian-centric order by force, stripping Libyans of fundamental rights, actively replacing indigenous Islamic customs, laws, institutions with structures aligned solely with Italian interests. In a profound irony, this very attempt to impose stability by force built on oppression and violence was actually identified as a key cause of the widespread and persistent Libyan resistance itself.
And that unification of the different regions, Trablusgarp, Cyrenaica, and Fezzan that we talked about earlier, that was also a central part of this stability strategy, wasn't it? Bringing them under one Italian-controlled umbrella to create more manageable colony.
Yes, it was a central and highly strategic component of that imposed stability. Mussolini deliberately combined these disparate historical regions into a single administrative entity he called Libya, a move that effectively and controversially influenced the current borders of modern Libya. The underlying goal was to integrate the colony as a cohesive social, political, economic extension of Italy, thereby directly supporting its broader expansionist ambitions in the Mediterranean. In 1939, to further solidify this integration and assert permanent control, Libya was formally declared an integral part of the Italian state. Seen as Italy's fourth shore and its potential granary, a source of agricultural wealth, a place for Italian settlement. The stated aim was to bring Western civilization, and more specifically fascist civilization, to the land, homogenizing it under Italian rule, erasing its distinct identity to make it easier to govern and extract resources.
But this forced stability, built as it was on extreme violence, cultural suppression, subjugation, it was inherently unsustainable, wasn't it? It seems like a classic historical example of a policy designed for short-term control, but ultimately doomed to long-term failure and deep resentment.
Precisely. It was a fundamentally unsustainable approach, relying solely on brute force,
Mhm.
suppressing a people's identity, imposing an alien system. True, lasting stability just cannot be imposed indefinitely against the will of a population, especially when it's built on such a foundation of oppression and blatant disregard for basic human dignity and rights. History, of course, demonstrated this conclusively with the Italian withdrawal after World War II. The seeds of resistance sown during this period would continue to shape Libya's relationship with Italy for decades, even after independence was achieved.
Moving now into the independent era, how did Italy's pursuit of stability evolve? Especially after the discovery of Libya's vast oil fields. The stakes for maintaining stability must have just skyrocketed, transforming Libya into an even more critical strategic asset.
They absolutely did. With Libya's hard-won independence and the subsequent discovery of those vast, easily accessible oil fields, the country's economic and strategic importance soared to new heights. King Idris I, understanding the profound need for national development, a path to prosperity, sought to foster economic growth through new projects in agriculture, transport, industry. He aimed to achieve this by cultivating balanced, pragmatic relations with various Western countries, including Italy, thereby opening Libya to international investment and expertise. Italy swiftly capitalized on this openness, leveraging its historical ties, its geographical proximity, to establish strong economic bonds. Making significant investments, particularly in the vital energy and automotive sectors, as we noted earlier. This mutual desire for economic development and access to resources converged, significantly contributing to Libya's prosperity and, crucially, its remarkable stability during his reign. It was a period where Italian interests aligned very closely with Libya's internal development, creating a kind of symbiotic relationship.
But despite the monarchy, Libya always had these incredibly complex internal dynamics, right? With numerous tribes and ethnic groups, that must have made national unity a constant fragile challenge, even under a single ruler.
That's a crucial point, and it really underlines the inherent fragility of Libyan statehood, even in its early independent years. Libya's societal structure was, by its very nature, prone to deep instability, internal fragmentation. It wasn't a homogeneous nation in the traditional sense. It was more a complex mosaic comprising over 140 known tribes and subunits spread across its three historical regions, Tripolitania, Fezzan, and Cyrenaica. These groups were frequently embroiled in disagreements, internal conflicts, even historical blood feuds that had simmered for generations. This deeply fragmented social landscape meant any central authority, whether it was a monarchy or later a republic, had to work incredibly hard just to maintain cohesion and prevent the country from tearing itself apart.
So, given that internal complexity, it's often said that Gaddafi's greatest, albeit controversial, achievement was perhaps bringing some semblance of order, maybe a unified national identity, to this inherent chaos. Is that an accurate assessment?
Indeed, it's a widely acknowledged, if darkly ironic, point. Gaddafi's most notable, albeit authoritarian and often brutal, success was undeniably contributing significantly to the construction of a Libyan national identity. He managed to control the disparate ethnic groups and tribes under his autocratic rule, often with an iron fist, but also by bringing them together, at least superficially, on common ground, fostering a shared, if sometimes enforced, desire for coexistence. He achieved this through a complex mix of strategies, sometimes gaining their respect through powerful pan-Arab and anti-colonial rhetoric and actions, sometimes by granting specific economic or political privileges to certain tribes to secure their loyalty, and consistently by initiating various social programs aimed at enhancing national welfare, like his ambitious Great Man-Made River Project. This complex, often brutal approach allowed Gaddafi to establish and maintain a considerable degree of internal balance and stability for over 4 decades, creating a centralized state where none truly existed before him.
This impressive internal stability under Gaddafi, even if authoritarian, seems to be a key reason why Italy consistently maintained relations, even through incredibly difficult times, despite his unpredictable and often openly hostile actions towards other Western nations.
Absolutely. This is really the heart of Italy's pragmatic approach. Despite serious issues like the mass expulsion of 20,000 Italians, widespread property confiscation, persistent demands for colonial reparations from Italy, Rome observed Gaddafi's undeniable success in stabilizing Libya. Given Italy's substantial investments in vital energy interests in the country, particularly its reliance on Libyan hydrocarbons, Libya's internal stability became an indispensable prerequisite for Italy's own economic security and domestic order. Even when the Gaddafi regime faced severe international sanctions due to alleged terrorism ties, Italy consistently demonstrated its deep reluctance to completely sever relations or fully align with the harshest international condemnations. Their pragmatism, driven by vital national interests, consistently outweighed the desire to align fully with international moral or ideological outrage.
And The soft approach initiated by Aldo Moro back in the 1970s truly continued through this entire period, didn't it? Becoming a fundamental, almost unchanging bedrock of Italian foreign policy towards Libya. It seemed to transcend party lines.
Yes, it truly became a fundamental state policy, a long-term strategic commitment that outlasted numerous Italian governments. Thanks to Moro's shrewd and pragmatic approach in the 1970s, crucial agreements were signed, fostering cooperation in economic, scientific, technical fields. This not only paved the way for Libya's internal stability under Gaddafi, but also ensured healthy, productive bilateral relations for Italy. Giulio Andreotti, who served as prime minister multiple times throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, wholeheartedly adopted Moro's perspective. He consistently viewed Gaddafi as an indispensable counterpart for maintaining peace and stability in the Mediterranean region, often publicly defending the need for dialogue. His personal notes, public statements, reveal no condemnation or criticism of Gaddafi. In fact, he often adopted a surprisingly supportive stance, seeing him as a necessary evil for regional stability. There's even compelling evidence, revealed later through declassified intelligence documents, that Italian intelligence actually thwarted a coup attempt against Gaddafi in 1971, directly informing Libya. A clear, almost astonishing sign of Italy's deep commitment to the regime's stability, purely for its own strategic interests.
That's an astonishing level of commitment to stability, even to the point of aiding an authoritarian leader against internal threats. What were the tangible financial benefits for Italy that justified such an unwavering and at times ethically dubious stance?
The financial benefits for Italy were substantial, remarkably tangible, further cementing the powerful interdependence between the two nations. Libya invested significantly in Italy, becoming a major foreign investor. In 1976, through LAFICO, the Libyan Arab Foreign Investment Company, Libya acquired a substantial 9.7% of IFIH shares for $450 million. This investment was absolutely crucial. It effectively saved the iconic Italian car company, a national symbol, from impending bankruptcy during a tough economic period. This financial intervention continued to grow until 1986, when Libya's relations with the U.S. and UK deteriorated significantly due to terrorism allegations. Later, in 2008, the Libyan Investment Authority, Libya's sovereign wealth fund, and the Central Bank of Libya further deepened their financial footprint in Italy by buying substantial shares in the major Italian bank, Unicredit. These deep mutual investments created intricate financial networks that undeniably increased the interdependence between the two countries, making political and economic stability in Libya even more critical for Italy's own financial health.
It's almost unbelievable that even after the Lampedusa missile attack in 1986, which was a direct, unmistakable assault on Italian sovereign soil, Italy didn't retaliate. That seems to underscore the paramount importance of stability, of preserving the relationship above all else, even national pride or alliance solidarity.
It absolutely highlights the paramount importance of stability and the extraordinary lengths Italy would go to preserve its core interests. Despite being forewarned by then Italian Prime Minister Bettino Craxi about the impending U.S. bombing of Tripoli and Benghazi, a warning that actually allowed Gaddafi to escape to safety, Libya still retaliated with a missile attack on Italy's Lampedusa island, a NATO base. Yet Italy, despite the direct provocation, the diplomatic outrage, the domestic pressure, remarkably refrained from any military or significant economic retaliation. Their calculated decision was to prioritize preserving their long-term interests in Libya through maintaining stability, rather than risking a full-blown escalation that can jeopardize everything: their energy supply, investments, the stability of their backyard. It was a testament to cold, hard pragmatism.
And during the comprehensive sanctions that followed the Lockerbie bombing, Italy's stance remained unique among its Western allies, essentially acting as a dissenting voice, resisting the pressure.
It did, positioning Italy quite distinctly within the Western alliance. Italy continued to resist imposing the comprehensive UN sanctions after Lockerbie, fearing it would deeply destabilize the entire Mediterranean region, which they considered their backyard, a zone of vital national security. They also simply couldn't afford to risk losing Libya as a crucial trade partner and an indispensable hydrocarbon supplier, particularly as Europe faced increasing energy demands. Italy actively worked to minimize the crisis's impact on bilateral ties, while, crucially, still publicly condemning international terrorism in principle. They pursued this pragmatic two-track approach, minimizing negative effects on their direct relations with Libya while simultaneously, partially, accommodating U.S. demands by condemning terrorism. Ultimately, Italy then stepped forward to act as a crucial bridge to help Libya re-enter the international community, working tirelessly behind the scenes to convince other nations of Libya's supposed trustworthiness in counterterrorism. This persistent advocacy played a key role in the lifting of the UN embargo in 2003, a decision also influenced by Gaddafi's strategic concessions on his nuclear programs and improved human rights rhetoric.
And as the 2000s unfolded, with increasing globalization, migration pressures, illegal migration became a huge issue, especially for Italy, right? Adding another urgent layer of complexity to the stability equation in their relationship.
Indeed, it became a pressing humanitarian and security crisis that really reshaped the dynamic. Libya, due to Gaddafi's Pan-African ideology and an explicit open-door policy for sub-Saharan countries, tragically became the central migration route for hundreds of thousands attempting to reach Europe, particularly Italy, given its proximity. Gaddafi's wealth and the job opportunities within Libya itself also attracted many migrants to Libya as a destination, making it a hub. This uncontrolled influx added migration and critical urgent security concerns, particularly human trafficking, border control to the already pressing energy and economic interests in Italy-Libya relations, further emphasizing the absolute necessity of stability both within Libya and in their bilateral ties. The chaos of uncontrolled migration posed a direct, destabilizing threat to Italy's internal order and social fabric.
The 9/11 attacks in the U.S. also fundamentally shifted the global security landscape, didn't they? And impacted how Italy viewed its relationship with Libya, making former adversaries potential partners against new kinds of threats.
Yes, profoundly. The rise of asymmetric threats like border security, global terrorism networks, illegal migration, human trafficking in the post-9/11 world made cooperation with Libya absolutely essential for Italy's own domestic security. Unlike conventional warfare between states, these are diffuse, non-state challenges. Think of it as a fluid, often invisible enemy that doesn't respect borders. Italy quickly recognized it couldn't effectively tackle these complex issues alone without robust cooperation from Libya's internal security forces, however flawed they might be. This new world order necessitated deeper collaboration, transforming the focus from purely economic to a critical blend of economic and security needs. This led to the landmark 2008 Benghazi Agreement, signed by Berlusconi and Gaddafi. It not only settled Italy's historical colonial reparation claims, but, more importantly, established a new comprehensive framework for bilateral cooperation and investments across various sectors, boosting trade and, crucially, directly addressing the critical issue of illegal migration through joint border control efforts.
So, in summary, Italy clearly believed its gains, its core interests, were just inextricably linked to lasting peace, order, and stability in Libya. It wasn't just about what they could extract from Libya, but what they desperately needed to preserve within their own borders.
Precisely. For Italy, the relentless pursuit of power and economic advantage was always balanced and often constrained by the fundamental need for stability in Libya. They understood that without a stable Libya, their crucial economic access, their vital energy supply, and even their own domestic security, particularly regarding the flood of irregular migration, would be constantly at risk. The pragmatic policy was meticulously designed to achieve both, often through incredibly challenging and at times controversial means, demonstrating a profound, almost singular focus on national interest above all else.
Okay, then comes 2011. After the uprisings against Gaddafi began, the international community, including many Western nations, sought to resolve the burgeoning crisis. What specific role did Italy play in this incredibly chaotic and transformative period?
Well, the initial international response was coordinated, but it quickly proved insufficient to manage the chaos. The Libya Contact Group, formed in London in March 2011, quickly deemed the Gaddafi regime illegitimate and officially recognized the National Transitional Council, the NTC, as the legitimate government. This was a huge shift, signaling the end of Gaddafi's rule was internationally accepted. However, despite elections being held in 2012, which offered maybe a brief glimmer of hope, many of the armed groups that had participated in the uprising, sensing their new power, vehemently refused to disarm or integrate into a national army. This immediately led to ongoing internal conflict, fragmentation, a power struggle among various factions. It prevented any swift or meaningful transition to stability, creating a vacuum that would quickly be filled by, well, chaos.
And then NATO intervened, leading ultimately to Gaddafi's capture and death. What were the profound consequences for Libya itself, and how did this violent end completely reshape Italy's long-standing, meticulously crafted policy of engagement and stability?
Gaddafi's death tragically ended his 42-year authoritarian rule, yes. But instead of ushering in the peace and democratic transition many hoped for, it just ripped open a devastating power vacuum. Rival government forces, literally hundreds of armed militias, various terrorist organizations, including ISIS, quickly proliferated, plunging Libya into deep instability and a prolonged, brutal civil war. The consequences were dire, immediate, tens of thousands of deaths, rapidly deteriorating living conditions for civilians across the country, a worsening array of economic and social problems that continue to plague the nation today. For Italy, this wasn't just a disruption. It was a complete and utter unraveling of the stability and predictable engagement it had painstakingly sought to cultivate for decades. All their efforts to maintain a stable, accessible Libya were suddenly, violently undone.
And this growing chaos, particularly the frightening proliferation of extremist groups like ISIS right in Italy's immediate neighborhood, must have worried Italy immensely, especially regarding the direct threat of terrorism spilling over onto its own homeland.
Absolutely. Italy's decision to join NATO's intervention, albeit with some initial hesitation due to constitutional constraints and intense domestic debate, was heavily influenced by profound, almost existential fears. Italian Foreign Minister Franco Frattini at the time explicitly stated concerns that if the situation spiraled, radical terrorist organizations would nest in the Benghazi region, and thus terrorist networks would come very close to our homeland. The threat felt very real, very close. Italian air forces actively participated alongside the US, France, and UK in NATO's military operation. However, even this intervention, despite its stated aims, didn't bring the desired stability. Instead, political chaos intensified dramatically. Characterized by a complex, multi-sided power struggle between the UN-recognized Government of National Accord, GNA, in Tripoli, Haftar's forces controlling much of the east, and various Tuareg Tebu militants and critically entrenched ISIS cells. The intervention tragically became part of the problem rather than the solution for stability in many ways.
It sounds like this internal fragmentation, this chaos, even benefited some groups politically and economically, almost turning Libya into a free-for-all, a chessboard for external actors to play on.
Yes, tragically so. It effectively transformed Libya into a chessboard for a multitude of external actors. Western powers, including Italy, but also various Middle Eastern states like Turkey, Qatar, the UAE, began supporting different, often opposing factions within the country, fueling what essentially became a proxy war fought on Libyan soil. In this profoundly fractured and highly competitive environment, Italy's long-held influence and momentum in Libya, especially economically and energetically, significantly waned after the civil war began. Its long-held position of prominence, its carefully cultivated special relationship, were severely challenged, almost eclipsed by the more decisive interventions of others.
How did Italy, with its pragmatic historical approach, try to navigate this incredibly complex, fragmented landscape where its traditional influence was clearly eroding? Did it even have a coherent strategy at that point?
Italy attempted a delicate, maybe overly delicate, multi-pronged approach. It sought solutions with Western countries and the broader international community, aiming for multilateral efforts, UN-led mediation. But crucially, it also engaged directly and often controversially with both the UN-recognized Government of National Accord, GNA, in Tripoli, and often simultaneously with Haftar's forces in the east. This was an attempt at a multi-sided or equal distance policy, aiming to secure a mediation role for itself, preserve some influence with all key players, hoping to be seen as a neutral broker. The 2012 Tripoli Declaration with the GNA was an early step, aiming to secure existing Italian interests and contribute to Libya's stabilization through technical commissions, especially for border policing, migrant movement control, and high-tech surveillance systems to manage the growing migration crisis.
And they signed another significant memorandum of understanding in 2017, didn't they? To address some of these pressing issues, particularly illegal migration, which was just flooding into Italy by then.
Yes, they did. This 2017 Memorandum of Understanding, signed with the GNA, focused squarely on development cooperation, combating the lucrative and horrific human and fuel trafficking networks, and significantly enhancing Libya's border security. As part of this, Italy pledged direct support to the nascent Libyan Coast Guard, promised investments in various economic development projects to alleviate poverty, and committed to supplying naval vessels and border security equipment to Libya. The 2018 Palermo Conference was another Italian diplomatic initiative, bringing together Libyan factions, opposition leaders, international actors, in an effort to foster dialogue, preserve Libya's fragile institutional structure, and unity amidst the escalating civil conflict. Italy was desperately trying to be the convener, the mediator, to regain some control over the situation.
But despite all these efforts to be a neutral broker, Italy's multi-sided or equal distance approach seems to have weakened its overall position and effectiveness, didn't it? It sounds like they struggled to be a decisive actor in a conflict that really demanded clear choices.
Yes, that's a critical observation, and one of the core insights from this period. Despite its attempts to strengthen ties with the GNA, Italy strategically avoided completely severing contact with Haftar, even when his forces were openly challenging the legitimate government. For example, after 18 Sicilian fishermen were detained by Haftar's militias in international waters off Libya in September 2020, the then Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte and Foreign Minister Luigi Di Maio personally visited Benghazi in December to negotiate their release. Now, this move, while successful in freeing the fishermen, further solidified Haftar's status as a legitimate interlocutor in Italy's eyes, effectively undermining the GNA they were supposedly supporting. It sent mixed signals.
This equal distance policy, engaging with all sides, contrasted sharply with how other regional powers, like Turkey, approached the conflict, right? Turkey took a much more decisive stance.
Indeed, and this contrast really highlights the cost of Italy's indecision. Turkey's consistent, unequivocal military and political support for the legitimate GNA solidified its position, dramatically increased its political and military influence in Libya, becoming a decisive kingmaker. Italy's hesitant, multi-sided approach, in contrast, meant it couldn't provide the decisive desired support for Libya's stabilization that either side truly needed or wanted. This ultimately diluted its leverage, risked losing influence among both Libyan actors. It created this perception of strategic ambiguity, of weakness even. And the information suggests that Italy's own domestic political instability played a significant role here too. Frequent changes in government, ideological differences between ruling parties, persistent internal disagreements within government since 2011. Think of it as Rome battling internal demons while trying to project strength abroad. This constant shifting of internal political winds meant Italy often lacked the unified, decisive stance that other regional players, like Turkey, displayed, ultimately preventing Rome from formulating and executing a firm, consistent Libya policy, and thereby diluting its leverage in a really chaotic landscape.
So, Italy couldn't really be a decisive actor in Libya's post-Gaddafi chaos. Instead, it was forced to constantly adapt to the shifting situation on the ground rather than shape it, watching its historical influence erode.
That's precisely it. They became more reactive than proactive, struggling to exert their historical influence in this profoundly fragmented landscape where clear allegiances are being forged, often by others. However, recent events, particularly the war in Ukraine and the resulting European energy crisis, have provided a renewed impetus for Italy. This geopolitical shock has prompted Italy to take more decisive steps to secure its energy supplies from diverse sources. In January 2023, for instance, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni visited Tripoli, signing a significant new gas deal with Libya. This agreement, directly aimed at addressing Russian natural gas supply issues, marks a clear, enduring, pragmatic drive to secure Italy's energy security, demonstrating that despite the political turmoil past missteps, the core fundamental interests remain paramount and will always reassert themselves when push comes to shove. So what we've seen in this deep dive, really, is this consistent, almost unwavering narrative woven through a century of history. Libya has always been a top foreign policy priority for Italy. Always. This stems from their undeniable geographical proximity and, crucially, two intimately intertwined motivations that have relentlessly driven policy for over 100 years.
First, Italy consistently viewed Libya as a critical source of power. Simple as that. It was an energy hub, a source of vital raw materials, an essential trade market that fueled its industrialization, its economic growth. From the early colonial era right through to today's essential large-scale energy deals. This wasn't just opportunistic, it was and remains absolutely fundamental to Italy's national development and economic well-being.
And second, Italy has always seen Libya's stability as an absolute, non-negotiable prerequisite for protecting its own interests. Instability in Libya doesn't just threaten Italy's economic and political gains, it poses very direct, often immediate risks, particularly concerning irregular migration flows, broader security concerns like terrorism, which can easily destabilize Italy itself and even reverberate across broader Europe. For Italy, you see, a chaotic or ungoverned Libya is basically an existential threat right on its doorstep.
This inherent dual drive, the pursuit of power and the absolute imperative for stability, means Italy has had to walk this very fine line, often adopting a remarkably careful, sensitive, and uniquely balanced approach to its relations, even when dealing with unpredictable leaders or navigating really volatile geopolitical situations. It truly sets their foreign policy apart in many ways.
However, the civil war and the NATO intervention post-Gaddafi revealed a significant, challenging shift. Italy's policy became characterized by indecision, by hesitation, engaging with all rival factions in Libya in this broad, multi-sided approach. While this is often driven by a genuine desire to cooperate on pressing issues like illegal migration and security, it ultimately fragmented Italy's traditionally pragmatic strategy. This diluted its effectiveness in restoring genuine Libyan stability and consequently significantly diminished its ability to fully protect its own long-term interests. It's a stark lesson in the costs of strategic ambiguity.
So, what does this all mean for us as we absorb these complex historical currents? This deep dive into Italy and Libya really makes you think, doesn't it? About the long, complex shadow of history, the intricate, often brutal dance between national interest and global events, and how even the most pragmatic, maybe well intentioned policies can buckle and be undermined under extreme pressure and internal division.
It raises a really important question, I think. When a nation faces a choice between maintaining influence through broad, multi-party engagement, that equal distance approach,
Hmm.
or committing decisively to one side for maybe a stronger, clearer outcome, which path truly leads to long-term stability and secured national interests? It's a challenge many nations face in complex conflicts, and Italy's experience here offers a compelling, if perhaps cautionary, case study for sure.
Definitely something to mull over as you navigate your own deep dives and observe geopolitical maneuvering in action. Until next time, stay curious.